All right. Well, this is the official welcome to our lobby day, which this year is lobby evening or lobby night. I don't know if it's going to be a tradition. I hope not, frankly, but it is great to see everybody. And I think we have a good evening scheduled. Before we really get into the lobby day festivities, I would like to ask Marcia Kelly. She had something she wanted to share with us, and I would appreciate her doing so.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share with the AAUW people at large, some of you already know, but in February, Betty House, who was a past state public policy chair and was on the state public policy committee for a long time, actually, I think served on one of the national committees as well as a public policy for Delta Kappa Gamma and president of the Oregon Women's Rights Coalition. Anyway, she died in February after a hard 8 months of being in the hospital 3 times. Her services are going to be in the summertime. So if somebody wants to know when that's going to happen, I'm going to ask you to email.
Marcia, you just muted yourself.
I hit the wrong. I'd ask you to contact me through her email because I still have control of it. The services are going to be sometime in the summer because her relatives are all in Iowa. But I did want to take this opportunity because I knew there would be people throughout the state who knew of Betty and knew her devotion to public policy for AAUW and other organizations.
Thank you, Marcia. It sounds like she was a grand woman, and sorry I didn't have a chance to know her, but thank you. Thank you for bringing that information. Okay, are we ready for some tips on communicating with legislators? How about that? Welcome, everybody. I think Nancy said it right, virtual lobby day instead of, whatever. So we are stronger together. So let's go. Do you want to pull the next one? Okay. Before we kind of get to this, I just want to say, before you even get to thinking about lobbying or communicating with legislators, you really have to do your homework. You have to learn who your representatives are. And, before the issue even comes up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had the wrong one on. So here's the first one. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. I figured you'd catch on. And here's some examples. Learning who your representatives are. You have a a House representative and a senator, and it's easy to find out that information. And obviously, if you have any questions about that, let me know. It'd be a good idea to sign on to receive their newsletters. Attend town halls and other gatherings and meetings. One of the things about lobbying is it's all about personal connection. I mean, there are some exceptions. There are some major powerhouses, shall we say, for example, business and lobby, business and labor. But there are a variety of other for-profit and non-for-profit organizations and indeed individuals who, once they establish a relationship, are really listened to. And that's the key, be honest, be straightforward, be who you are, but establish that personal connection. Okay, now we do our homework, even more homework. Now we have an issue we want to talk to a legislator about. Really dig into the issue, not just your point of view, but, put yourself on the other side, be a lawyer. This is basically what lawyers learn to do. You give, I'm a recovering attorney. You give me a sentence and I can immediately think of an argument for it and an argument against it. I may be, wanting one or the other, but really deeply think about. And for example, how does it impact me is one way to look at it. how does it impact the whole, if we had a state rule, how would this apply to the whole state? What would the impact of that be and the effect of it? Sorry about, I got allergies and, spring is starting. So develop a respectful response to the arguments that would be not in your favor. See if the legislator has taken a stand on the issue or something related. And one of the ways you can do this is check the Oregon Legislative Information Service, also known as OLIS. And I've given you, that's the 2021 R1 is relates to the 2021 session. But you can just Google OLIS or Oregon Legislative Information Service and it'll come up. And a good way to find out what the legislator you're seeking to connect with, how that legislator might, be pro or con about the issue. Go onto the site, check the bills icon. It's kind of like a circle. And then there'll be a drop-down menu and you enter the name of the representative in the bill sponsor. And I mean, frankly, you can do this for every session, but I would suggest either the present or maybe the past session, particularly if you're between sessions. And just, take a casual walk by what the legislator has supported, what they've opposed, and maybe not about the specific issue, but related ones. Like if you have something that you're really interested in about protecting wildlife. So then take a look at what the environmental stance of the senator representative was. So you go down and you'll see, okay, House Bill 2323. And so you hit 2323 and then you take a look at it. Oh, well, this was a bill about recycling and this legislator was against it. Now I know recycling and protection of wildlife don't necessarily fit in the same category, but I think you can get what I'm talking about. I will also tell you, frankly, that there are some issues that I see a legislator has supported, and I frankly know it's probably not going to be very fruitful. For example, if I see that the legislator has been in favor of or against abortion or right to life or, that whole issue, I can get a pretty good idea about what in general that legislator might think about things. But, you never want to just assume, that, here's either a hardcore liberal or a hardcore conservative because, they do exist. But a lot of times there are issues that, that they get interest in. So that's a good way to kind of figure out who you might want to deal with. But, in terms of your own representative, how you might wish to present the issue. So more of homework. It's really important to know the major supporters or those in opposition. And again, if you find a similar bill, when you go to the bill, you can look around and usually there's testimony that's been filed and you can look that up. Oh, what did this organization say? And you're looking for the pro and con. Those in favor of firearms control, those against firearms control. That might not be your issue, but read the testimony. What are the pros and cons? As I said, initially, that was something that was really important to do. This can kind of maybe flesh out that process. Another thing is, now this is kind of something that when you're actually in session, make sure that the issue is within the purview of the legislator. There are sometimes that there are specific issues that, say, for example, might apply to Baker County or Clackamas County, but have no necessarily statewide application, or just wouldn't make any difference to Multnomah County. So that would give you a clue as to who you might want to speak to, your representative or someone else, or how you might want to phrase it with that representative. To the extent, again, now we're talking about you've already done your homework, the legislature is on, you're looking for the bill to see if there's, something related. Know the bill number, House bill, Senate bill. I am really sorry. And House bills have 4 numbers, like 2323. Senate bills have 3 numbers, 233. There are some exceptions. There's some joint resolutions, and there's some funding bills. Some of those have 4 letters, 3333. But, generally speaking, when you're talking about a policy kind of bill, House bill will have 4 numbers and the Senate bill will have 3 numbers. I'll also say that usually in the House, the first numbers are 2000s, and the first 10 bills have a tendency to be the priorities of the leadership. So those might be good ones to just kind of, swing by to get a feeling for what's the flavor of the session. And are you going to, kind of have to be, pulling up on a rope to get your issue listened to or dealt with? Or can you, join in? Is it kind of part of the flow? Like I would say in this session, equity is a really important aspect. There are bills about teaching racist history. There are bills about law enforcement. There are bills about collecting information on race, gender, et cetera. So I would say that, there are other underlying issues, but those are some, and you can get an idea from that. Okay, Vanna, next. Obvious, but maybe not so obvious. Where is the bill in the legislative process? Presumably, if you have a bill number, it's been read, which means that it's going to be an official bill. But has it been referred to a committee? Which committee? Who's on the committee? Like, who's the chair? Who the vice chair? And usually there's Republican, Democrat, depends on who's which party has control over the particular house as to whether it's Democratic or Republican. But there's a vice chair usually that's of the opposing party, and sometimes 2 vice chairs. Again, if you're curious about the chair of the committee, you can do the same process to go and find out what's that person about. What has she or he been supporting in the past? It's important to know which committee. There are various deadlines that come up, and the president of the Senate usually and the Speaker of the House announce these fairly early on, indeed before the session. And some of the deadlines are, there's a public hearing that, that's when people come and say, I'm for it or I'm against it. Then there is a work session, which is when the legislators get together. There's no public testimony, but it's a public event, and they determine, okay, are we going to send this on to the House or the Senate with a do pass recommendation, or are we going to not do that or take no position? Obviously, a do pass recommendation, if that's the bill you want to have passed, is the best. But the deadlines, there are deadlines. As a matter of fact, tomorrow is the deadline by which work sessions have to have been scheduled in the first house where it's being considered. So if a bill is not scheduled for work session at the end of tomorrow, it's done for the session. Now, sometimes there are bills where there's one bill that says the same thing in the House, and I see that, Joyce, I'll get there. Anyway, sometimes there's one bill that's just a exact duplicate in the House and the Senate. And that's kind of an effort to avoid some of the deadlines. There's also, if it's in the Rules Committee or Ways and Means, they're not subject to those deadlines. But then there are other deadlines, the date by which a work session has to be held, et cetera. So you need to know those deadlines so you know whether, you're just out of luck and, maybe it's the next session or you're on track. Should I stop and look at the chat here? Okay. Joyce Zook, there are many healthcare bills. No. Oh, there is, but Joyce is asking, there are many healthcare bills. Is there a way, for example, she can just put healthcare in OLAS and, find out what the healthcare bills are? There's arguably a process by which to do that. I have never found that to be helpful, which is why at the beginning of the session, I go through every single bill. Now, when you pull up a bill, there's a little summary. So I don't read every bill, but there'll be, age discrimination in the task force. Oh, don't want to do that one. Department of Revenue, Department of Administrative Services, don't want that. But, I go through, and this session, there are about 3,000 bills. So, it's not the most wonderful process, but that's why we have things like our State Public Policy Committee. That's why I work on this. We do our level best to take a look at those bills and try to keep track of them. So it's certainly possible if you ever have a question, hey, what are the healthcare bills out there and what are we supporting? I try to give that information on public policy updates, although this has been a really busy session for me. But feel free to contact either a member of the State Public Policy Committee or me directly. Okay, hopefully that answered. Yeah, and Camille, know your enemy. And as Marcia said, that's right. I said rules and revenue, rules and ways and means, but it's also revenue. Thanks, Marcia. She's pretty up on all this stuff too, so she'll weigh in if I say something wrong. Okay. We did this. Okay. One of the things to make sure, when you're thinking about an issue, is it a state or a federal issue? If it's the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, there's some state implications of that, but it's a federal bill. So, what's that relationship? If you're talking about, I don't know, they're just obviously some federal bills. If it covers the whole, if you're looking to have a bill cover the entire United States, it's federal. If it's just state, it's state. So, should you be talking to someone in Congress or should you be talking to someone, a state representative? This is really important. Identify the staff. They don't get paid a lot. They get hassled a lot. Be gracious, be respectful. I have personally found them to be extremely helpful. I mean, there is a level, a chief of staff is obviously going to be more informed and helpful than perhaps a legislative assistant. But even there, I think everyone really tries to help. You might want to read the representative's website biography before you go walking in the door. Is there something you have in common? Hey, I went to Lewis and Clark too, or I noticed you were born in blah, blah, blah. Again, I'm not saying it's absolutely necessary, but again, the whole theme here is to establish a relationship by the personal connections and by being well-informed and being someone that the legislator can trust. Okay. When you're communicating with the legislator, and this is true for when you're sending in a letter to a committee in support or in opposition, or to the legislator in support or opposition, or you're meeting with the legislator personally. It's always better to use personal examples. When I was working at so-and-so and I was, 67, I got fired with a whole bunch of other people who are over 65, all 10 of us. but no one else got fired. That kind of personal example is worth its weight in gold. Avoid form letters. That doesn't mean that when, we send out a, here are some suggested issues, you can stick those in there too, to kind of add to your point, but saying something personal is really important. Know your data, bring it along. I wouldn't say get lost in it, particularly if it's a face-to-face, but prepare some sort of summary, particularly with the data. And as you walk in, representative or senator, here's the basic information. Here's the problem. Here's what I want to do about it. Here's where it is right now, in the what committee, whatever. Or if it's an electronic meeting, send it by email to the representative before you meet with her or him. So, we're talking about knowing the facts, establishing the personal communication, so you build up trust so that, someone's wanting to listen to what you have to say, because representatives and senators are people too. And they get, pulled in 15 different directions. So, okay, next. As I said, provide your written information at the outset. It kind of maybe even gives, the representative a chance to, now who's this? That kind of thing, which can be very helpful. So I think I already said that one. Next, okay. How many times have we heard this about a lot of communications aspects? Really listen to what the legislator is telling you. That's so important. And sometimes the nuances are important too. If you are going to disagree, and that sure does happen, do it agreeably and with respect. That doesn't mean you say, oh yeah, I agree, I'm going to change my mind. There are circumstances when one is not treated respectfully. And I will say that has happened to me. And I just kind of double down on respect and go back to the data and the issue and just make sure it stays on that level. I think we kind of all know that, but sometimes when you're in the office of a legislator, you feel like, just you have a point, you're trying to make it, you've done your research, say it. Don't burn any bridges. You may need to advocate with this representative again. Okay. Are we, okay, again, and I'm gonna kind of whip through here. Be brief, keep the conversation on track, ask the legislator for a specific action. Will you vote for this? Will you support the bill being passed? And you want to really make sure it's not, oh, I think this is a really good idea, or, well, you've made a really good point. You can't be obnoxious about it, but, can I count on your support voting for House Bill 2323? If you don't get a yes, you'll know. And if they say no, that's fine. You have that information. If they say yes, right on. Let's go. And at that point, you might say, is there anything else you think I should be doing or we should be doing? Is there anyone I should be talking to? Obviously, and again, these niceties, I think some people just don't do, but I think are really important. Again, legislators are people, staff are people. Follow up, thank them. They've taken time away from you. It might only be, 15 minutes at the max, but thank them, thank the staff. And maintain the relationship. Remember at the very beginning, go to the town halls, get the newsletters, stay informed. And one of the issues that we're going to be dealing with in the second half or second portion of this presentation is, how an idea becomes a bill and then becomes law. Well, something, just because it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that you just wow, I've got this idea. I'm going to take it to the legislature and boom, it's going to happen. So keep trying. But, there is a level of, not being a nudge, as I've heard some people say, or being a pill. There are a lot of requests and asks of legislators. So picking your time, going back and reviewing all of what you've done and what you need to do is really important. Don't be a pill. I try not to. All right, so ta-da. AAUW Oregon, public policy, we're stronger together. That is my presentation. So before I go on too much, being minority, Anne, the Oregon State Senate Republican delegation be the minority party has utilized it in the walkout. Well, since there are some critical bills pending, how should we address this problem collectively? I think that might be a good question to ask of Representative Power and the folks that are going to be here with her. There are some things legislatively that are being done, but I think that's a good question. Hopefully that's okay. And how many of the 3,000 bills will actually go to committee? I don't know. A third? Yes, that's a good thing, Pat Squire, about capitals should be open to the public. So save those questions. And before I turn this over, I would like to thank Nancy Brown for the wonderful illustration and putting together of the presentation. I give her this kind of text, wordy stuff. As I say, I used to be a lawyer. I can do all this text, but Nancy Brown puts it into a very usable format, and I just want to thank her so much. Okay, well, I just want to welcome Representative Power, Carrie, and Alicia to our group. I know we have at least 50 and more who are attending, and we just had a little series about tips about how to communicate with legislators. So hopefully I don't violate any of the tips that I just gave. I'm just going to introduce each one of you, and then I'm going to ask Rep. Power to speak first and just kind of give an idea about where she is in the session, what her priorities are, anything in general that she wants to say about how an idea becomes a bill, becomes a law. And I've already said that just because you have an idea, and a great idea, doesn't mean that, wow, it just goes right into the legislature and boom, it's a bill and a law the first session. So Representative Karin Power grew up in a small town in New Jersey and went to Mount Holyoke College, where my mother went, before moving to the West Coast. So I'm always going to mention that when I introduce you. She spent time in Geneva, Washington, D.C., Boston, Seattle, and Portland before making her home in Milwaukee. She and her wife live in Milwaukee with their toddler, baby, and 2 rescue dogs. In her other job, Rep. Power is Associate General Counsel for the Freshwater Trust. She's a graduate of Lewis and Clark Law School and is also a board member of Oregon Food Bank and the Spirit Mountain Community Fund. Carrie was a PhD, Dr. Leonard. She's currently the Chief of Staff. Remember I said there was a difference between a legislative aide and Chief of Staff. And she deserves all the applause there. Anyway, she serves as Chief of Staff for Rep. Power. She has a PhD in physical oceanography. In that regard, she states she's an earth scientist who finds great satisfaction in changing the status quo. Her 20-year career has included a variety of work communities, from consumers to federal, state, and city policymakers, the academic research community, the regulatory community, and the environmental conservation community. Not too shabby. Okay. Alicia Temple. She is the legislative advocate at the Oregon Law Center. for she advocates for justice for low-income communities. She brings 10 years of experience in advocacy and policy, and she's very good, after getting her start as an intern with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Oregon in 2010. Her current role at the Oregon Law Center focuses on human services and addressing the harm of policies that criminalize poverty. She has a master's in public policy, and she currently serves as the co-chair of the Human Services Coalition of Oregon, also known as HISCO, and the NARAL Pro-Choice Oregon Foundation Board. And we are delighted to have all of you here. I'm going to stop talking, and Rep. Power, you're on.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you all. And thanks for having me here tonight. I wanted to provide a little bit of background about my role in the legislature and the work that I'm doing, because I think it'll help be a little bit more information about my priorities this session as we get into those, and sort of how legislators don't know everything that's going on in all committees, and where you all come in as incredibly helpful advocates too. So just by way of background, this is my 5th year in the legislature. I am serving my 3rd term, and my district is House District 41. So I've got Selwood over to a little bit of Brentwood, Darlington, incorporated Milwaukee, and then down to Oak Grove. I am the youngest mom in the legislature. I have 2 kids under the age of 5. My oldest now is 4.5, and I have a standing desk so he can no longer Zoom bomb me. And I've got a 7-month-old who took a really late nap. So we'll see how much background noise you hear from him later as he wakes up. When I joined the legislature, as Trish mentioned, my day job is as a nonprofit environmental attorney. So the speaker had put me on most of our natural resource environmental committees. That was really fun for me, but turns out my district has broader interests than just that. So I've increasingly asked her to diversify my workload. And one of the greatest things about being a public policymaker is you get to learn about things that you have no background in whatsoever. So it's been a real joy. I had worked on Oregon's climate program for the last couple of years in the cap and trade policy. And with the conclusion of that last spring with the governor's executive order, I was ready to try something new. So right now I'm trying to reform our early childhood systems and governance and agencies in tandem with a whole host of great advocacy organizations. So I have 2 chair roles this session. One, I'm chair of the Early Childhood Committee in the House. And then I'm also chair of the Subcommittee on Civil Law and Judiciary. I'm vice chair of our Judiciary Committee. And I'm also newly on the Joint Transportation Committee and the I-5 Bridge Replacement Committee. And then I've got several smaller administrative committees that I serve on an as-needed basis. It sounds like my 4.5-year-old is slamming his toy car against my door, so please let me know if that is distracting. Great. It's always louder to us than it is to people on Zoom, and I know that. So that is my workload for the year, and I can talk about priority bills a little bit. That's what I'm in charge of, and it's great serving my district. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been a year and a half. We never really took a break, as many of you might know who work closer in public policy. We went straight from last year's end of the session. And I think we had a couple days before we got our first COVID case. And legislators have been working pretty much nonstop. And at this point, between the wildfires in September, the ice storm last month, we are really hoping there's not just a plague of locusts coming, because I think that's the last thing that Oregon could possibly see in the near future. So I'm really hoping that this all meant that we're going to have gorgeous spring weather, a great summer, and well on our way to recovering from this unexpected pandemic. So I'll turn it back over to you, Trish, while I get the kid who's banging into my door to step away for a second.
All right. Carrie, tell us about what it's like to be chief of staff. I mean, what is that all about? What is a legislative aide? Are they all the same? And how about you?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I have been in the legislature for a year now. And so in some ways, my experience is very different than normal because I've never worked in the Capitol. Ever since I started working there, the Capitol has been closed. The building has been closed. So legislative aides are, I mean, as you can tell from my background, one of the reasons I came to work with Rep Power in particular is because I am really vested in climate change policy. And I do have a pretty strong technical background. And so I was brought on to do a lot of the background work on some of the policy we do there. And, but that said, most legislative aides in general, when you call, we're the first person you talk to. So you also become a bit of a generalist, and you learn who within the state system to go find answers from. So actually we're pretty good researchers in that sense. And we're also like, it's how to make connections. Often people contact us because they're frustrated. They're stuck. They're trying, like the system's not working for them. They can't get an answer elsewhere. And so the aides are often there just to help navigate the system or make connections. We really just make a lot of connections and then get out of the way. Chief of staff level, I do help Rep Power with her policy work. I do some drafting of amendments in particular, but also bills. I sit with stakeholders and try to work with who do we need to have at the table to be discussing about these topics. As Rep Power said, what don't we know and who should we be talking to? And really trying to think a little bit bigger picture about those types of questions and what are we missing? I'm able to go to some more community events or like other government, don't know the word I'm trying to say, but public meetings and things that Rep Power is not able to go. So I can get information out there that other folks are talking about to be able to go, oh, well, we should probably be talking to this person also. And so that's my job.
Yeah, sounds pretty interesting. Sounds like it's also a moving target, but you didn't say that, but that was my editorial comment. Alicia, what's it like to be an advocate in this environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we are all trying to figure that out to some degree still. As Rep Power said, it's been a wild year. We went straight from short session. It's funny to think back, I mean, not funny in a real funny way, but short session, as I think many know, ended with a walkout. So we kind of had I had a week at home of just like waiting to see what was going to happen next and trying to figure out what was going to happen. And then I had a week break because the Law Center is a wonderful place to work and they acknowledge that we need a break right after session. And it was the day I was supposed to go back to the office was March 16th, which is the day everything shut down. And then since then we've had 3 special sessions and all the other kind of emergencies in this last year. So I think there's a lot more buildup to a session for advocates and lobbyists. I like to think of myself as a lobbyist because I kind of like to reclaim that word a little bit because I actually think it's really important that there are lobbyists for human services and low-income communities. But usually there's like a whole year of work that goes into before a session starts, where we are building our coalitions and we are doing a really deep dive into the policy. And as Carrie said, figuring out what we don't know and therefore who we need to talk to. And this last year, there just wasn't that time because there was a new emergency every couple of months at the Law Center. Housing is one of our really big issues among many things. And so the, kind of constant eviction moratoriums and foreclosure moratoriums and figuring out how to keep people housed in this last year and how to keep people getting food and SNAP access and all of that. It just it was a constantly moving target. And then suddenly here we are in long session trying to pass bills that some of them are really important work that people have been talking about for a while, but they weren't pandemic related or they weren't wildfire related. And so now we're having to dive back into those. And I think you see that in the timelines this year, in kind of the chaotic energy of this session. And, you know, there's just a lot of really important work to be done. And we're all trying to figure out how to do it. And how to do it without being able to wander down the halls. I actually haven't met Carrie. I typically would have wandered desk to desk, office to office, and you know, introduced myself and chatted. I really actually enjoy small talk with people and just getting to know people. And I miss that a lot. And that's how you figure out a lot of what's actually happening in the session. And so that, you know, things that could have been, I swing by the office and I chat with someone's staff, now are 3 emails back and forth and connecting to somebody else. And that just takes so much time. I don't know if I answered your question at all, Trish, but maybe that's just kind of how I'm feeling about session right now on these deadline weeks.
Yeah, well, yeah, I really miss that personal connection too. It really has had an impact on all sorts of legislation. I'm sure everybody feels it. Let's see, I think the best thing to do is I'll ask kind of a question, and kind of whoever wants to go first can raise their hand. Otherwise, I'm gonna, you know, start with the representative, and then I'll go back and forth as between Alicia and Carrie as to who gets to answer it. The first question is, what are some of your biggest successes in terms of getting a bill passed? How long did you work on it? How long did it take to get passed? What are your thoughts about a successful bill? You know, you're sitting there by the governor, watching her sign the bill into law. How did that happen?
So I think we all find what we're good at, right? We're elected by our districts, then we get thrown in. We don't get to pick our coworkers in this legislative job. One of the things I miss out of everything is getting to meet my new colleagues and figuring out what strengths we each bring, so we can figure out how to meld our strengths and meld our interests into good legislation and bring our communities to bear. I think what I've discovered is an outgrowth of something I was good in law school, looking at the landscape of interests out there, looking at the landscape of opposition, and figuring out what are we going to be able to close on this year. And so I will just own, like, I am usually not the legislator who brings big, audacious, crazy ideas to hold a multi-year work group to figure out what's feasible. And that's a product of where I am in my life. I've got 2 small kids and I go back to a full-time day job. Every time there's a major work group like that, I have to take PTO at work, and there's only so much available to me. But what I can do is come in behind my colleagues who have been doing that work to push that boulder up the hill for a number of years and figure out what's not working. Who do we need to talk to? And is there a moment here where we can help slide that through? So most of my successes are not things that I originally brought at this point in time, with a couple of small exceptions. I have managed, you know, the things that I am really glad to have helped finish were getting the Clean Air Oregon program passed and funded in the 2018 session, passing cap and trade in the House with a broader vote margin than we had anticipated, passing a diesel phase out legislation in the Portland metropolitan area, which would have been a 5-year effort. I passed new pregnancy and changed our workplace pumping legislation for working parents. And I was able to lead a sort of under the radar effort to take out some really old transphobic language from state statute, which had been there for a very long time, bothered people for a long time, and they just were afraid of igniting the sort of anti-trans people. Technical fix law. I mean, my favorites are the ones where you're like, legitimately, this is a technical fix law, but it just concerns a subject area that people are a little worried. And despite the big, broader cap and trade, I don't know, for me, it's been both a success and a failure.
We can get to the failures. We're going to get to the failures next. So hold the failure.
That's really, I think that's what I enjoy doing, is coming in and helping my colleagues who bring those like big pieces and figuring out how many of those big pieces overlap in subject matter, because you really can't pick all of your things at once. But which ones are good to sequence, and how do we tee other stuff up for success in the next couple sessions?
All right. Let's see, Alicia, why don't I have you go next? What do you feel are some of your successes, and how do you feel you as a lobbyist were able to have an impact on that success?
Thanks, Trish. I thought about this question in advance a little bit, and the bill that I have been able to work as part of a team to pass and get done that I'm the most proud of is it was about driver's license suspensions when people aren't able to pay their traffic fines or fees. So until recently in the state of Oregon, if someone couldn't afford a traffic ticket, the state suspended their license, which for low-income communities just meant they couldn't go to work, they couldn't drive legally, they couldn't get healthcare, whatever it might be. And we knew that this was an ineffective policy that caused a lot of harm to our communities. I started at the Oregon Law Center in December of, I wrote this down because I couldn't remember, 2017. And on my very first day there, friend of a friend, who was an author who wrote a book about criminalizing poverty, came into our office and talked about the harms of fines and fees, and specifically court debt and these traffic violations. So that was December of 2017, and that bill just passed last June 2020 in the first special session and was effective October of last year. So bills just take a really long time. And I think I knew it was going to be hard, and yet was still really surprised by how hard it was. Because the idea, we thought of it in December, there wasn't enough time to get it ready for the short session in 2018. So we teed it up for 2019. And something Carrie said made me think of a phrase a friend of mine uses a lot, where it's, in this work, there are a lot of known unknowns, and then there are the unknown unknowns. And I think it's really, we know a lot about what we don't know. And so when you're bringing an issue, you have this kind of list of, here are the people who might oppose it, here are the other perspectives we need to get. But it's not until there is a bill, and it's often not until a hearing is scheduled, that you learn what you didn't know about who else might oppose it, about what the revenue office thinks it's going to cost, about what one specific legislator has, this one experience that really makes them spirited in one way or another. And you just don't know that until it's happening. And sometimes you can move past those things and still get it done. And in our experience on that bill, it meant we weren't able to move it in 2019. And then in 2020, after a really, really hard fight in the short session, we, on kind of the last, literally the day the Senate Republicans walked out, was the day we convinced the committee to move it without amendment, and we had won our committee battle, and then the Senate Republicans left. And so I was preparing to bring it back in 2021 and do the fight all over again, and was really fortunate and thrilled when the legislature decided to take it up in the special session. But it was a journey, to say the least.
Oh, yes, I know about those. Carrie, what are your thoughts about, actually getting something across the finish line?
I'm very new, so I don't know if I'm the best one to weigh in on this. I would say, though, what I found is that in my time is that often things don't make it into a piece of legislation, not because the person who's writing it or who's working on the bill is leaving something out deliberately, but it's, again, that they don't know that something may be an issue. I have one small example is that I'm an e-bike rider, and often e-bikes are left out of the conversation when we talk about building infrastructure for charging electric vehicles. And so there's some bills in front this year about funding for infrastructure for electric vehicles, and it was just raising that with the other staff member and the representative that I think we need to call out e-bikes specifically because they'll get left out, and that got put in. And so that's one of those things that it's just it's realizing that we don't all know everything, and again, it's not deliberate that it's not there, and being able to see what I know, where that can make a difference.
Yeah, I would also say, there are approximately 3,000 bills that, were filed. And I just want everybody who's listening to this just to think about all the different topics that 3,000 bills cover, from, little minutia to big, huge packages and issues. There is no way every legislator can know everything about every bill. It's just not possible. So anyway, okay, now we get to go to the bad stuff. Sometimes, bills don't make it. Rep Power, can you give us, I think you probably already have a little bit, but can you tell us about a bill that didn't make it? And like maybe cap and trade, why didn't it make it? What is there something you think you could have done, should have done, did, shouldn't have done, whatever? How do bills, not make it? Why?
So I think my best analogy, and maybe this will be, hopefully this resonates with some of you. I feel like the 80s movie Tron is sort of like the legislature. There's this level, which is us. There's this level, which is governor and agencies that we don't necessarily have any control over. And then there's like a whole different playing field of people out in the community who are thinking ballot measures, ballot fights, PACs, fundraising, future elections. How does this play into it? Lawsuits, and future candidates. So there's just like whatever you're working on. If it's a big thing, which is a real honor to work on the big stuff, there are organizations outside your periphery working 5 or 10 or 15 steps ahead of you, sometimes working 2 or 3 years ahead of you with how they're going to respond to this organizationally. And the big stuff is all interconnected in the legislature. So I think Alicia's point about why do things take so long? The big things take a while because they do occasionally serve as drag coefficients on the other big stuff. Because there's only so much staffing that we have available. And I think the thing that I've discovered through cap and trade is when your party makes or highlights a couple big issues as a priority, you think of the sheer staffing that requires to bring them to fruition. Because I did not come into that subject area as an expert. I make decisions based on figuring out where my colleagues stand on things, the feedback I get, what I think is good policy, and then kind of guess at the rest when it comes to how is this going to affect people outside the building. So especially when you come in with big stakeholder coalitions, they have their own politics. And I really discovered in that work that I am like the front woman in a really cool movie where the cast and crew you can't even see half the time. And if it were not for the brilliant expertise of 5 people who worked full-time on that bill, 3 from one from the governor's office, 2 from another agency, somebody was hired in from another agency to work full-time on it, my amazing LPRO committee analyst, Beth Riley, and the revenue finance people to help bring it to fruition, plus our lawyer down in legislative council, where it was like the 4th or 5th year she was working on the bill. You know, I bring it to fruition because my job is this level. Talk to my colleagues, work with the information that's fed up to me from below. And really amazing coalitions like that are special. The failure wasn't about us. It wasn't about the policy. It was the 5 to 10 years ahead that people are playing on climate policy and what it means to pass something that is a second in the nation policy and what that signals to people who don't want that to happen. So a lot of that is always out of my control. The best I can do is, even in failing, fail big, fail as successfully as I can be, and be the best human I can be while doing it.
It must be a disappointing experience, though. I mean, you know, at least you have home and hearth to keep you grounded.
Oh, I cried in the speaker's office for 4 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've all been there. I mean, on the big stuff, you know, the big stuff is hard. And it's like that in life. I mean, I'm under no illusion that will be the last time I fail so publicly. But I was like, you know, there's a moment in time where I thought we were going to pass and be the second in the nation cap and trade program. And then I was like, what the heck do I do next year?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Should I just retire? Just kidding. But there's always more good work to be done.
Don't retire. We need you. I don't allow it.
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen to that. And, you know, we were not in that issue, not strong advocates, but, you know, we were there as, you know, supporting you as best we can. Carrie or Alicia, do you have any comments on the, you know, didn't make it and why didn't it and how did you deal with it and so on? From Alicia, why don't I pop to you and leave Carrie there at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't worked on anything as big as what Power was just talking about. I think the Oregon Law Center, our issues aren't ever quite, well, not never, but are usually not that political or on that large of a scale. But I mean, certainly many failures. I mean, I don't think you can do this work without feeling. And to what Power said, everything in this work is building on itself. And when you do succeed, I mean, again, on my driver's license suspension bill, it was what felt like years of failure. But then when it happened, it was a special session. So it happened in like 4 days. And I knew it wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been for the 2 years of conversations that I'd been having around the state with people. And the fact that everyone knew what the bill was, they knew why it was important. And all of those failures had built up to then it being able to happen. And another example I can think of where I hope is similar, that I hope is going to now succeed, but we'll find out, is in 2019, worked on the earned income tax credit renewal. And we are both asking to increase. What was that?
What's the earned income tax credit?
Earned income tax credit is a tax credit that goes to low-income workers that is widely seen as one of the best tools for alleviating poverty that we have, particularly childhood poverty, because if you are it's only for working families, but it gives quite a bit of money back, both a federal credit and then there's a state match. And so in 2019, the credit was renewing, and we were hoping both to increase the amount the state matched so we could get people more money and to expand it to people who the federal credit right now considers not eligible, and that's largely undocumented workers. So people who are working, they're paying taxes in Oregon, but the federal government doesn't count them towards these tax credits. And in 2019, at one point, well, we never really made the choice. The legislature made the choice to not do both parts of that bill, but we did renew and we raised the EITC, but we were not successful in extending it to ITIN filers. Sorry, ITIN filers. Yeah, the category of tax filers that don't have social security numbers. Sorry, I realize I talk in code sometimes. It's a
we all do
try to get out of. But so since then, there has been so much work with a governor's work group, with a bunch of coalition partners, and I can't take credit for any of it. I wasn't able to participate in the interim groups, but to really dig into the issue and figure out how to bring it back. And now we're back this session with a bill specifically about extending the credit to people who aren't eligible federally. And I think, I mean, it's expensive. We'll see what happens this session. I think money is often the reason things fail in the legislature, which is its whole own conversation about both really good policy ideas, but then also how do you fund it and how much money does it cost and who figures that out and all of those pieces. But you know, we're on our second cycle of trying this, and I think we'll try it until we get it done, and that might be this year, it might be other years. One thing that, again, this will be the last thing I say, sorry, to Rep. Power's comment about being second in the nation, there's always this interesting push and pull, I think, of Oregon doesn't tend to want to be the first to do things. We want to see that it's worked other places. We want to model our policy on effective and best practice. And when we were having this conversation in 2019, no one else had done this yet. They hadn't extended the earned income tax credit. Now a couple states have done it. And so there's a model for how departments of revenue could implement it, what the form looks like, some of just those logistical questions about how does the actual policy work, other states have done. And so I think that's often, you know, part of the process is figuring out where we fall in a national landscape on issues.
I just want to add that we're supporting, we've officially sent in testimony in support of the RDC, you know, ITIN legislation.
That's right. Thank you.
And, you know, hope it moves forward. Carrie.
I would say, failure. I'm not going to categorize what I'm going to talk about as failure, but one of the things I do a lot are talk to constituents, folks who are calling out and they're calling us. And over the past year, many of those folks have been struggling with getting unemployment. And so I've been trying to help them navigate the unemployment situation. And what has been interesting to me to learn is what can we do in the legislature, and then what can't we do within state government? Like where are the limits of what we can change? And that's, so it's like it's dual, because I can get very frustrated, as Rep. Power will attest to, but I'm also a problem solver. So part of this has been able to think about bigger picture. What do I see that's broken, and but also how can I see that we could fix it? And I don't know, I don't have the answers to that, but it is something that it gives me something to do with my frustration. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily a failure, but it is when our job is to help the people that elected Rep. Power, that can be challenging.
Yeah, I can echo a lot of what's being said. I also experience, you know, we've had a few successes like in the Title IX field, excuse me, the Oregon Department of Education didn't even have one full-time person, you know, for all K through 12 on Title IX. Now that took me, or us, I should say, definitely us, more than a couple of years to get one full-time person. It's actually 1.5. But maybe you guys also experience it's kind of like, oh, wow, I did it. And then it's like, ooh, we've just begun. There's still a whole lot more that needs to be done. But anyway, I think there's some questions which have come up in the chat, but I do not want to leave out, do you have any advice for us, either as individual voters or as AAUW of Oregon? I mean, I always say, I don't know, we're about 1,300 or whatever. Our strength is that we read, we think, we can write op-eds and write letters to committees and to legislators, and we vote. So, I think those are all, some pretty good things to think about. But, AAUW of Oregon is not the biggest, most powerful person or organization around. Hopefully we've been able to obtain or attain some respect. But and as I think Marcia Kelly, who also works in the legislature, AAUW of Oregon worked really hard on getting kindergarten. She says from 1927 until the 1980s to get it mandated. And then it had to be funded. So, that's an example of something, and AAUW was absolutely at the forefront of getting that on board. So, but the question is, and I'm going on, I apologize, what should we be doing either better, or do you have any advice for us? And Rep. Power, I'm going to ask you to speak to that.
Do you want me to start with advice for individual members who are interested in a topic, or collectively as the organization?
Whichever you prefer. I'd like to have you address both, but whichever you want to tackle first.
Sure. I think what Alicia said earlier about the session not ending is true. And I just ask for a little bit of your grace as very smart people who engage in the legislature. If it feels discombobulated, it's because it feels discombobulated to us too. We don't have I've never appreciated 5 minutes in the hallway so much in my life. I don't know what's going on in other committees. And Carrie has recruited some great interns for our office who are helping to keep track of other things and keep us generally informed. But we're not supposed to be spending time with each other super close in proximity. And so I really can't have in-depth conversations with my colleagues the way that we usually do. And I can't talk to members of the lobby. We are on back-to-back Zooms and then committee hearings all day. And being on video, I mean, you saw me just switch from standing to sitting. Being on video and in one spot is not great. Not a great environment for keeping your brain active all day. We have a slew of bills. If there are ones that have caught your attention as individual members, one of the greatest, one of the most helpful types of meetings I'm having over these couple of really important weeks where it's bill deadlines, and our first chamber deadline, you remember, is the second Tuesday of April. It is really helpful to know what else is out there and what else is great policy. Even if it's not in especially if it's not in my committees. I know what's in my committees backwards and forwards at this point in time because it's what we are in charge of. It's really everything else that's out there. I miss meeting with constituents. I miss hearing from constituents. So our office is thinking about emulating some others and instituting some drop-in office hours, which would be sort of more akin to visiting the Capitol, coming to see your legislator, saying hi, and talking to us about what you do. I think we didn't really have an interim. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is essentially like, we'd usually introduce a bill or ask for it to be drafted in September, and then you spend October, November, December in work groups. And then you come into the legislature with a good idea about where people stood. we are hearing bills for the first time. Our staff have been maxed out this whole year. Nobody got any breaks, really. And we went straight from wildfires into recovery, into a surge in case counts in winter. And that really impacted our ability to talk with each other, because it was, as stuff was locking down, our constituents needed more support. People were reaching out to us because their businesses were getting closed down or people were getting laid off again. So that's where we are in session. That's how you can help us or engage with us. If you've got a great idea too, I think we're all going to need a little bit of an actual break in July to reset and then recommit to serving our constituents and helping them to get through this. It's going to be a multi-year recovery. My hope is that we get a little bit of a breather, no major natural disasters in the early summer, so people can actually get a little bit of time off with family and friends that they maybe haven't seen in a long time.
No locusts, no locusts.
No locusts. I'm back at it. And we'll head into next year's session. Here's where I think AAUW could help us. And it's not on any one particular policy. You work on multi-year efforts. And I feel like, especially this year, it has highlighted the way that the legislature as a part-time job does not work. And I know that we have a new committee that the BIPOC caucus asked to be formed to advocate for a modernization of our legislature. But groups are asked to work on policies essentially for 18 months to bring them to fruition at least, because we have these short sessions to do cleanup, and then so many people go back to their regular jobs. That does a disservice to mobilization of people and interests. I mean, you pour so much of your own selves and your expertise and your professional work into helping to advance policy. And legislators in our capacities really are the thing holding us back from being able to treat this like a full-time job. So, the structural ways that you see us not working, the structural things you see working in other states better. I'm not asking for, a ton of pay. I would take better pay for our staff, frankly, so we could retain great year-round staff and more than just one of them. But it is a significant impediment. Next week, for example, the legislature, because Republicans in the House are having us read bills, the speakers called for us to have floor sessions 11 to 1 every day, Monday through Thursday, and then evening floor somewhere between 5:30 and 9 or 7 to 9. This job does not work for single moms. And I think about, how do we center people who have the greatest lived experiences, who can help us address structural inequities? And those are the people, those are the parents I want, those are the kinds of people and life experiences I'd like to have here. So I'd like to have a legislature that works for a single parent, not just because I love Katie Porter and I want more Katie Porters in office, but I want more Katie Porter's experiences with whiteboards in office everywhere. And that's one of the ways I think your organization could use its full force and experiences to help us be better for the entire state.
Well, at some point I may be talking to you about that a little bit. So I'll take a look into that. Gosh, I don't know who, is it Carrie or Alicia? What should AAUW, what advice do you have for us as an organization or individuals? Carrie, I'll pick on you.
Okay. I would say as individuals, Rep. Power alluded to this, but it's knowing the timing, knowing when you're approaching your legislator, and also being aware that if you come to them and you have the best plan, best idea, and they don't respond right away, it's because they just can't at the moment, or their staffer can't. And so maybe you should try again. but I'm in all seriousness, because I do see great ideas come across our desk, but I, at this moment, cannot respond to the person. And so that's, the other part of it is to really clearly, Trish, you alluded to this, clearly articulate like the problem and the solution for whatever it is that you're bringing, that you're interested in. So you do have to do, you know, your background, your back research. What other work has been done in this topic area that you're interested in other states, for example, or in municipalities that you know have worked. And that, because if you can bring to your representative something fleshed out, they're going to pay more attention to you because you can take that. I can take that, or Rep Power can take that, and then start to figure out if this is a thing that could actually go somewhere, and much easier than an idea. For AAUW, as you mentioned, Trish, this session has been about equity. And I do think it's really important for those of us, I will put myself in your category because I was a member of AAUW 25 years ago, not anymore, but that it's important to look at what we are fighting for. I mean, there's fighting for our equity, but there's also the folks that we have also left behind. And so it's bringing everything that we have, that you have as an organization, to the table, as well, to look at what's out there and how can you leverage the bigger social movement that's happening right now. That's kind of an ask from me to you, but I've been doing a lot of self-reflection in that arena as well.
And I have to say that has really had an impact on our, the issues that we're supporting this session. You know, obviously our demographic is pretty much white, pretty much older. But I think all of us have a keen sense of responsibility to those who didn't have the opportunities because of those very factors that we have. And so we have really been engaging in, I mean, it's hard for us because there's just so much out there. But as Alicia talked about with the ITIN and the ERTC, that's such an important issue to even in just sending in testimony, although we've also participated in some stakeholder meetings too. I think that's great advice. But Alicia, what are your thoughts about what advice to AAUW and to individuals? And then I have just a couple questions that have come up in the chat.
I think I would echo so much of what Carrie and Rep Power said. And I do want to add to what Rep Power said. Legislators should be paid more, not because Rep Power specifically needs a higher salary, but because that's what enables people to do this job full time. And there aren't a lot of jobs where you can be gone for 6 months every other year, plus work all the hours they work in the off session. And in order to get the people who have lived experience in the job, there has to be a living wage, which there just isn't now. And that is a personal Alicia opinion and not the OLC opinion, although I'm sure OLC could agree there too. But I think, let's see, advice-wise, I think a lot of it's been said. Timing is really important. And I think I deal with this in my organization all the time. And even just today, got an email from a colleague that was like, here's this important issue. It needs a statutory change. Can you do it this session? And I actually haven't responded yet because I couldn't find the nice words to say like, no, that's gonna have to wait till 2022. And I'm really sorry. And I know that sucks. And it just is what it is. And so I think understanding the timelines and being realistic. And this last year is a bad example for all the reasons we've talked about, but usually like sit down with your legislator in the off season or legislators who are interested in an area. And that's when they have 30 minutes to have coffee with you and have, I think as Carrie said, do the homework, know what your have your problem and your solution. I think legislators always say they want stories, and then when you bring stories, they say they want data. So make sure you have both of them, good data and a story or two, just because people have trouble, I think, visualizing sometimes what a problem really looks like until you can kind of walk them through, how did this happen? How does this look on the ground to somebody who's lived through this problem? Whether that's you or a family member or a constituency or community you're representing. And take advantage of when there is more time to do those conversations, because in the legislature, it's really going to go better if things are kind of fully fleshed out beforehand. And as Carrie said, you're presenting them with a good idea, and then it's going to get taken over by the stakeholder process and the politics and all those things. But be prepared for it to take time. I think those would be my best advice.
Sounds like good advice. We've had a couple of substantive questions. Rep Power, with respect to the climate change, I think they're referring to cap and trade actually, but were Native Americans brought in as stakeholders? Did they have any input in that process?
Yes. In the close coalition of stakeholders helping us to draft it, there was one enrolled member who was a liaison for the rest of our federally recognized tribes, and then a number of stakeholders. So he was helping to communicate, especially around investments, to make sure that they were directed to communities most impacted by climate change, and then addressing legacy issues like lack of historic investment in communities that have been left behind, who are then getting, disproportionately additionally hit by climate change.
I'm picking on you here, Rep Power, but any thoughts about a walkout this session? I'm aware that there is some legislation that's been proposed that deals with quorums and also charging fees and such to legislators who are gone without excuse for a certain time period. What do you think about that possibility? And I'll just leave it right there.
The possibility of the legislation passing, or possibility?
No, the possibility of a walkout and the likelihood that some of the bills, and you might want to talk about them a little bit more in detail, but do you think there's any chance of those really passing? And I believe some of them are constitutional amendments. So
I think when one of my House colleagues opened the door to right-wing extremists to enter and smash the building in December, my expectations of decorum and a normal sense of session have only gone downhill since the siege of the Capitol in January. I also was much closer to this in working on cap and trade in the protests at the Capitol, and seeing how people who felt like their ideas were entitled to be the right ideas were not, how can I say this nicely? I have a second floor office overlooking the door that was smashed in December. What occurred to me the most were the people who showed up were mad and entitled in the same way. They were angry, indiscriminately angry. And I think that's where we're seeing it's my way or the highway. I have a 4.5-year-old. You just kind of have to outlast that a little bit. It's a horrible way to talk about political violence, but it's true. We're going to outlast this session. I really hope we don't land in a place where bills die again for the third session because people don't show up to do their jobs. What their base seems to be mad about, the people who are encouraging walkouts, is that we have a governor who's responded to a public health emergency by continuing to enact restrictions. And the people who feel entitled to disobey those cannot. And they are angry accordingly. And they're happy to take down structures with them because they're not getting what they think is the right way. And so we are already seeing walkouts, or we're seeing the reverse of walkouts. And then we're seeing excuses and ways of explaining how those are not bad things. So in the Senate today, Carrie was tracking the committee for our office since I was in another hearing. The Senate heard legislation to fine people who don't show up for work, legislators who don't show up for work, by withholding our per diems. And the Republicans did not come to that hearing. They have not come to sessions. And on the flip side, on our side, my colleagues are requiring that we read every single bill in its totality, regardless of whether it's bipartisan or not. I think Senator Merkley shared some thoughts on the Senate today that we're seeing obstructionist tactics in Washington, D.C. come here. I don't mind legitimate political difference. That's the beauty of this job. I enjoy having great disagreements with my colleagues where we get to find common ground where we can, but I can't even find common ground if everything takes 6 times as long. I think good legislation is just going to die as a result. If that happens again, I hope Oregon voters decide what kind of political future they want for their state. Because it's a frustrating environment for us all to operate in, to try so hard and bring people along, and so many different organizations that work on policy, only to have it die for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
Well said. Well said. We did get a question on this about the corporate board diversity bill. Do you think that's going to move forward, or what? My name isn't on the question, but
I keep on getting questions from lobbyists, which is fun. They'll slide it into another meeting I'm having, and I know what other clients they have, and they go, I'm just wondering, where's that going? How's it going? I think it's good. We had a great initial hearing. I really appreciate if any of you came to testify. Thank you. I couldn't stay around the whole time because my other committee was voting on some legislation, so I had to virtually leave and then head back to committee. I think we are going to compare notes. It's in one of those committees not subject to deadlines. So it's been nice to take a little bit of a breather, come back to our committee, those committee members, and then my colleagues more broadly. There's like a dozen states that have passed or are considering legislation to this effect this year.
yes. Well, in the last 2 years, yes. So it's, California really began in 2018. I won't do my lobbying thing. I really don't. But starting in 2018.
Over the last week, I've gotten 2 amendment suggestions to get people to yes, organizations to yes. So people took it very seriously. I think it's a very serious bill.
Well, that's, I can't tell you and Carrie how much I have appreciated you working on this bill with us. I have really endeavored to not bug you. Sometimes it's, I'm so focused on this, but I have tried to not say anything. And hopefully I haven't overstepped here. This is a question that I think I'd like to ask all of you, but Rep. Power, I'm going to begin with you. What's the financial situation? What about revenue? Any idea about the, and other than the federal influx, and if you can certainly discuss that too, if you have any information. But what about revenue? How are we going to maintain revenue to keep our government going?
We have revenue. I mean, our state has recovered. It's how is the revenue generated, which is where we get into inequities in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, this year has just been wild because we've gone from this summer making cuts to programs in anticipation of a long, protracted economic shutdown, and then turns out this pandemic has disproportionately hit people who are lower income and thus don't actually generate that much in personal income taxes or revenue for the state. It is both a horrible and a great thing that our revenues have stabilized and are doing better. The stimulus has helped tremendously. And now we're facing, under a Democratic federal administration, one-time funds in volumes we've never seen before in some programs. And so we have a whole army of financial staff who work for the legislature, the governor's office, and different agencies to help rebalance and monitor cost and programs. The fiscal analysts, I mean, I just can't, you're having to move from a place of scarcity this summer into 8 months later, having to figure out how to manage enormous cash inflow. So I don't sit on those committees. The best I can see from bills that are moving or not moving, a lot of the initial measures we were having to take to balance the budget have not been as necessary as once feared. And now I think the pressure we're seeing is, Carrie can probably speak to this better than me, but please don't tax my stimulus check is the most common through line I'm seeing.
And beer.
And
Don't tax the
Carrie,
beer.
yes, and what's that about the beer? Because there is a bill.
Don't tax the beer. That's we're also seeing that, I guess.
The wine is okay, but not the beer. Carrie, do you have anything to add to the, I mean, you just did, but is there anything else that you would want to say about the whole financial revenue monetary situation?
I think that the stimulus is, I mean, there's the individual money we're getting, but the federal funds that are coming to the state, there's so much potential to kickstart some parts of our system that childcare that have always been in need and have always been not appreciated. And there's opportunity there to kickstart in a way that we haven't been able to in maybe forever. So there's some really interesting, exciting things to coming out of this.
Could you give it one? Could you give one example?
Well, the funding for childcare to help our childcare providers get back on track, but also to help bolster up the whole childcare system in general, just the administration of it, and then also how we can help. I mean, it's a long path, but how can we help raise the profession in general? And again, the respect, we could talk about teachers and all that, but I'm going to talk about childcare. Raise the respect for the profession, because what we've seen over the last year is the importance of childcare. When it was gone, oh my gosh.
Yes.
I'll talk about rental support, Alicia. How is your bit?
Go. Alicia, go.
I mean, Rep Power said what we know from this last year is that revenues at the state are okay, but the people who don't make much money are really struggling, and people are struggling to pay rents. They're struggling to get food. They are going into debt to try to pay off their bills. And we do have this new opportunity with this federal money to do something about it, which I think is really exciting. And I have been repeating this to anyone that will listen, but Rep Noss recently came to our HISCO meeting, our Human Service Coalition of Oregon meeting, and it was like 2 days after the federal bill had been passed, maybe the next day.
Yeah.
But he said, I mean, kind of what Rep Power just said, we've been in this scarcity mindset since the pandemic hit because we've been so afraid of what it's going to mean for revenue and from the state. And suddenly we have to switch to this mindset where there is this kind of abundance, but it's going to be really tricky. It has stipulations. It's going to have weird rules. And we don't have a ton of time to figure it out because the budget has to be done by July. So what does that mean and look like? And I think from a law center perspective, the question is, how do we get the most cash directly to people as soon as possible? Because we know that people are really behind on their rents and they are really struggling. And there's good federal money for housing, and the states put good money in. But then how do we implement it? And how do we make sure that the people who are in charge of getting that money to people have the staff and the capacity to do that? We have to be able to make it work throughout the whole system. And I maybe am, this is a weird week to be having these conversations, I feel a little bit like, because I am both exhausted from all, I mean, it's been a tough week. And there also is this little bit of hope where I think there are a couple bills in particular I'm thinking of. There's a bill to expand what was Cover All Kids, so health insurance, Oregon Health Plan level health insurance for children who are undocumented, essentially, who don't qualify for federal Medicaid. There is a proposal to expand that program to adults, so people who don't qualify for Medicaid, if only for their immigration status. The original bill was a pilot. It was a $10 million pilot that would just impact a small number of people. But the hearing last week, now there's a new conversation about, could we do the full thing? Maybe we should actually expand it to everybody who needs it. And I think that conversation's only possible because this federal money has changed. And I'm feeling a little hopeful that maybe we can really do it. Talk to me again in a month and we'll see where that's at. But
it is heartwarming. I urge all of our members to really follow the news and see exactly what was in that bill. It is fascinating. A devil in the details, as always. But firstly, with respect to our speakers, do any of you have any objection to this proceeding being on YouTube? Okay, all right, I'm seeing no problems. Okay, if you do, feel free to communicate with me offline. But thank you. You all, we could not have had a better panel. I'm delighted that you all took the time. I know that all of you are overworked and underpaid. We'll see what we can do about that. But we as constituents and we as AAUW Oregon members genuinely appreciate the work that you do, not just on behalf of us, but on behalf of all the citizens of Oregon. And we get that. So thank you so very much. Feel free to leave and, take care of kids or friends or partners or whatever. And we're seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat.
And Trish, before I go, because I'm going to go do a little parenting tonight. I mentioned this at our last in-person event, but I just wanted to thank your organization. I grew up one of 3 daughters. We were all voracious readers, and there was no way my parents could afford to keep up with everything that we needed. If it hadn't been for the AAUW used bookstore we literally halfway lived in during the summer, I will never forget leaving with entire paper bags full of books that we'd get for a couple bucks to carry me all the way through summer. And the way that it helped me and my sisters expand our horizons and learn so much and developed our love of reading. I mean, your organization across the country transforms lives. So thank you very much for allowing us to be here tonight.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
thank you.
Take care.